A bombshell name drop during testimony in the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking and racketeering trial. Why were singers Usher and Ne-Yo brought up in the courtroom? We're diving into the connection these A-listers and music legends have to the now disgraced music mogul, and what the night in question that a witness claims they were in attendance for means to how this trial could play out.
For years, everyone in the industry talked about the same legendary figure, the one who built careers out of thin air, the one who controlled entire genres with a single phone call, the one people feared, respected, and silently tiptoed around.
Sean Combs is connected to a lot of big names in Hollywood and the music industry. That's not breaking news, but it was a bit of a surprise this week when Usher and Ne-Yo's names came up during testimony. The witness that brought up Ne-Yo and Usher was Dawn Richard. She was once a member of the singing group Danity Kane. That group was signed to Diddy's label, Bad Boy Records, and she also sang for another bad boy group called Diddy Dirty Money. Sean Combs was actually part of that group. It was a trio. They had a few songs that came out between 2009 and 2011. Prosecutors called Richard to testify. Now, before I get into the moment where Usher and Ne-Yo were brought up, I want to take you through her testimony and what led to the point that she brought their names into this. Now, Richard told prosecutors in 2009 she witnessed Sean Combs allegedly attack his then girlfriend Cassandra Ventura, the singer known as Cassie, who has already testified in this trial that she was abused by Combs physically and sexually during their 10-year relationship that ended in 2018. Now here's a line in the transcript where Richard said, quote, "I observed Cassie being attacked," and then when asked who attacked Cassie, she answered, quote, "She was attacked by Sean Combs." In the incident in 2009 that Richard talked about, she said she was recording music at Combs' LA home. Cassie was making eggs, and then Combs comes downstairs, quote, angry, and was saying where the expletive was his eggs. Excuse my language. And he was telling Cassie that she never gets anything right, where the expletive is his food. And he proceeded to come over to her, took the skillet with the eggs in it, and then tried to hit her over the head with it, and she fell to the ground. Richard told prosecutors that she witnessed Diddy allegedly attack Cassie multiple times, physically beating her. And while she was a member of Diddy Dirty Money between 2009 and 2011, she said it was frequent that she would see these things. She said that Combs would, quote, punch her, choke her, drag her, slap her in the mouth. I saw him kick her, punch her in the stomach. Now, when it comes to Usher and Ne-Yo, their names are brought up related to an incident in 2010 that happened at a restaurant in California. Dawn Richard was asked about this incident both by the prosecution and defense, but it's interesting how her answers and the details she gives are different depending on the questions that are asked. Richard was asked about that incident. It was in West Hollywood, California. There was a restaurant, a dinner with a lot of powerful people in 2010. And at that dinner, Richard says Diddy allegedly punched Cassie in the stomach. She said, quote, "We were having a private conversation, and when we're all sitting, eating at the tables together, when I say we, I mean some bad boys, some of our other label, and some celebrities were in the room, and they were secretly arguing, and he punched her in the stomach." Sean Combs punched her in the stomach. The prosecution then asks, quote, "Who, if any of Mr. Combs' employees were present?" And Richard says Harv Pierre, Capricorn Clark, Mia, D-Rock, Bonds, myself, and Kalina Harper. Now the prosecution then asks Richard about Harv Pierre. He was a bad boy executive and he answered to Sean Diddy Combs. The prosecution also asks how, quote, employees reacted to Combs allegedly punching Cassie in the stomach, to which Richard answered, "They..."
And out of all the artists who rose under this powerful figure, none were more iconic than the one everyone believed was his greatest success, the prodigy, the chosen one, the young talent who skyrocketed to the top faster than anyone had seen before. And then today happened. Because after being silent for more than a decade, that very artist finally spoke out. No hesitation, no cryptic messages, no hints, just raw, unfiltered truth poured straight into a camera. And what came out wasn't praise, it wasn't gratitude, it wasn't nostalgia, it was a disturbing, dark breakdown of what life was really like behind closed doors with the most powerful force in the music world. According to this artist, the world never saw the real story. They saw hits, awards, fame, success, but behind the scenes, it was nothing like the dream people imagined. Instead, it was control, manipulation, pressure that felt more like a cage than an opportunity. The artist described
didn't really follow that line in their questioning. They did ask about bad boy employees who were present at the restaurant, to which Richard named people like Combs, the bodyguard D-Rock, Pierre the executive. But then the defense had their chance at cross-examination, and through their questioning is when we saw those big names drop. The defense asked Richard, please tell me who was all at this restaurant. Richard answers, Harv Pierre, Capricorn Clark, Mia, and myself, Kalina, our bodyguards, which was Bonds, and D-Rock, Cassie. The question continues with the defense asking, you remember who was all there, right? And Richard says, mm-hmm. The defense asks, do you recall alleging several celebrities were actually there? And Richard says yes, and the defense then says, quote, so when the government asked you who was all there, and I asked you who was all there right now, you didn't mention any of the celebrities, right? Right, Richard says. The defense then asks Richard to name the celebrities. And then she says, quote, Usher was there, Jimmy Levine was there, Neo came through. There were a few others too. I don't recall those people, but those are the ones I remember talking to. The defense then pressed Richard a bit, asking why she didn't say those names before when she was asked about who was there by the defense. And Richard says she was just repeating what she told the government in their direct examination. Usher and Diddy go back decades. Usher lived with Combs for a year, actually, when he was just a rising star in the music industry. He was 13, 14 years old at the time. Usher actually spoke about living with Combs in an interview 8 years ago on the Howard Stern show. Here's part of what he said.
You're going to go to Puff Daddy's. He's going
in the 90s. Do you understand what that's like?
Puffy's place was like just filled with chicks and orgying like nonstop, right?
No, not really. I mean, but hey, it was curious. I got a chance to see some things.
Now, as far as Grammy winner Neo, he is someone who has been known to be a friend of Diddy and to be in the same social circles over the years. He faced backlash for a comment he made in the wake of Diddy's arrest during a performance in New Zealand last year, where he reportedly said, quote, on stage, I was sexually assaulted and I liked it. I had a great time and I'd do it again. He later apologized for that and said, quote, in an attempt to be playful with my fans, I made an insensitive and irresponsible joke while on tour, and I'd like to truly apologize from the bottom of my heart. This is according to the UK media outlet, The Metro. Now, the other name that Richard mentioned was Jimmy Levine. He is a music legend. He is known as the co-founder of Interscope Records, so an incredibly powerful person in the music industry. It's important to note that in her testimony, Richard did not specifically say that any of the three actually witnessed that alleged moment where Combs punched Ventura in the stomach, but she did say that they were allegedly there that night. Now, none of the three have released statements since their names were brought up in court. Combs is on trial. He's expected to be on trial for roughly 7 more weeks. He's charged with racketeering, sex trafficking by force, and transportation to engage in prosecution. He has pleaded not guilty. Joining us now once again to talk about this case is former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney Safa Robinson-Ferrer. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Usher's name, he comes up yesterday, and that was kind of a moment where people clearly recognize who Don Richard was talking about. What should we take away from that anecdote and the fact that Usher's name was brought up?
The fact that Usher's name was brought up, I think one of two things about it. On one hand, it's irrelevant. It doesn't go to prove or disprove whether Mr. Combs is guilty of the charges as alleged in the indictment. On the other hand, I do think that it provides background information that there were other individuals that
walking into the industry young and hopeful, believing they had found a mentor who genuinely cared, someone who promised guidance, growth, protection. But slowly, things changed. Slowly, the guidance turned into monitoring, the protection turned into possession, and the praise came with strings attached so tight that every move, every word, every appearance felt like it belonged to someone else. Nothing was optional, nothing was truly yours. The clothes, the interviews, the parties, all planned, all monitored, all approved, and if you dared push back, even a little, suddenly, your album rollout stalled, suddenly, features fell through, suddenly, budget meetings were rescheduled. It was a silent punishment system that left you constantly wondering who you were and who you were supposed to be. What shocked people most was when the artist described the inner circle, a world the public never saw. Late-night gatherings that looked glamorous on the outside but felt cold, staged, and unsettling once you stepped inside. Rooms filled with people smiling on command. People who arrived
that could have possibly observed these alleged assaults or attacks on Ms. Ventura. Not only that, but if the government intends on establishing a timeline or a pattern of events with respect to Mr. Combs, his enterprise, and their dealings with individuals from the public or in the industry, it's good to note that the allegation, or at least the testimony came in, that Usher was involved with Mr. Combs early on in his career when he was approximately, I believe, 14 years of age, that he had gone to some sort of academy through Mr. Combs' enterprise or business. And the government can certainly use that to show a long pattern of behavior, dealings that he may have had with other individuals in the industry, and also to establish that Mr. Combs and Ms. Ventura had this long-standing relationship, that not only, there were a select few that got to observe, but that publicly some of these allegations or allegations of violence happened, and that other people observed those things.
And when we look at the transcript, and I have it here, and you have the defense asking why Richard did not talk previously in conversations with the government about Usher being there, Jimmy Levine, who's a famous producer, as well as the singer Neo. Should we take anything away from that it appeared that their names didn't come up earlier when she was having conversations with the government?
Yeah, what we can take away, and what the defense is essentially trying to do here, is really strike at her credibility. What the defense did during its cross-examination is say, well, these other individuals were there and you didn't disclose their names until now. And why was that? If you are participating in a government investigation, you're presumed and you should tell the truth, the whole truth, and the full truth. And you failed to disclose a significant thing, which were the other individuals that were present. You failed to disclose that to the government. And now it's only today, as you're testifying, that we're just now hearing of these other individuals, Usher Raymond, Neo, and other executive producers that were involved or possibly witnesses to the case. Again, striking at her credibility because she did not tell the full truth at the time she was asked by the government, which later down the line during closing arguments, the defense can get up and say, Ms. Richard testified A, B, and C to you. However, she failed to disclose X, Y, and Z, and that's why you shouldn't believe her. That's why you should not give her the credibility that the judge is going to instruct you on, and the jury can take that into consideration.
And one thing that's been apparent throughout all the witnesses thus far is clearly this was a relationship that had a lot of domestic violence incidents, but this isn't a domestic violence case. Yet it seems like there's a lot of people who witnessed physical abuse. And in this case, you have Usher and Neo. I mean, these are A-list celebrities who are seeing Sean Combs punch his girlfriend allegedly in the stomach, which is something that you would think if you saw that, on the outside, if you think you'd stop that, you would step in, you would say something, but apparently they didn't, according to Don Richard's testimony. Does any of that, the fact that he was doing this out in the open, play towards taking some of the domestic violence incidents, but showing that it was a much larger thing, which is what the government's trying to prove?
So with respect to the other individuals being present, although there's an allegation that they were present, and they're not really allegations, it's just background facts, I don't know that Ms. Richard has testified that they actually observed the striking.
Full of excitement, but over time became hollow versions of themselves. Some left without explanation, some disappeared entirely, and the artist made it clear, these weren't coincidences, they were warnings. The artist said they spent years convincing themselves the pressure was normal, that maybe every superstar lived like this, that the emotional exhaustion, the mental manipulation, the fear of disappointing the one person who controlled your entire life was just part of the deal. But eventually, they realized it wasn't mentorship, it wasn't tough love, it was dominance disguised as opportunity. They said the most disturbing part wasn't the control itself, it was the way the powerful figure made you believe you needed it. Made you believe your entire career would collapse without them, that your voice, your image, your talent, your success only existed because they allowed it. And when the artist finally attempted to take back even a small part of their life, the retaliation was immediate, quiet, but unmistakable. Doors that were always open suddenly slammed shut. People who used to answer,
maybe they did, maybe they did not. But I don't think that that's going to do any benefit for the government as far as knowing that these things happened more broadly. I mean, it's clear as day that this case is rooted in domestic violence, that Mr. Combs was domestically violent towards Miss Ventura, whether it was isolated behind closed doors and just Miss Ventura, and a close select few were testifying to this, or on a grander scale where, a select few and publicly people can testify or people have observed these allegations, whether it was just one or whether it was many. Testimony is evidence, and whether that was testimony from one person or testimony from multiple people, the jury can still consider that as evidence in determining whether Mr. Combs is guilty or not guilty. If these individuals observe that, then, the hope would be that someone would have intervened earlier on. But again, it doesn't negate the fact that, the charges here are racketeering, sex trafficking, and things of that nature. One of the things the government is alleging is the use of force. So I think that's why we continue to hear this domestically violent line of questioning. And I think the government is hoping that the jurors will view this as satisfactory to the element requiring requiring force, physical force of violence.
Yeah, and to your point, I'll just looking at this transcript, you're right. Yeah, it's Usher was there, Jimmy Levine was there, Neo came through. So it's saying that they were there, not necessarily that they witnessed the abuse that Dawn Richard said happened at this dinner. What did you make of her testimony now that she's off the stand?
It was pretty interesting testimony. I don't know that she was a necessary witness, although the government deemed her to be necessary. Miss Ventura got on the stand and testified about the abuse, testified about what happened to her. Miss Richard seemingly came up behind her and corroborated for the government those allegations. And I don't think there was even a question about that. The hotel footage came into evidence. Miss Ventura testified, so now Miss Richard is here testifying to more allegations of domestic violence. And the government has to be really careful here, because the way that it is being painted at this point is that this is a domestically violent case, which is true. But the government needs to prove a RICO. They need to prove sex trafficking. They don't need to prove domestic violence, and it can certainly confuse the issues with the jury and ultimately land them in a verdict of not guilty.
I know some of the evidence that the government will point to, some of frequent flyer accounts, credit cards, bank accounts. We haven't really heard a lot about that as of yet. How do you see the government, now that they've really established, whether it's Cassie's testimony, some things that Dawn Richard has said about the domestic abuse, the violence that was in this relationship, where do they go from here if they are going to paint this picture of a RICO, which is essentially what they need to do in this trial if they want to get a conviction?
Yeah, so what the government's going to continue to do is put on their witnesses. I think that they got a witness on the stand that worked for Mr. Combs at a certain point in time. That individual also testified to some alleged violent behavior on behalf of Mr. Combs. I think if this individual is still testifying, or as other individuals continue to testify, we will start to hear about transportation with regard to these alleged sex workers. So one of the things that the government has to prove and show is that there was a transportation via interstate commerce, which is a very wide net and catch-all for the government in order to seek a conviction, is that these individuals were transported or traveled via interstate commerce from one state to another. So we may hear testimony about frequent flyer accounts, or whoever the individual was that set up these or purchased these plane tickets, or if they flew private, whoever set up the transport.
Their calls stopped picking up. The machine turned off. The artist described a moment, a quiet, private moment, when it hit them that they hadn't made a real decision for themselves in years. That every choice they thought they made was orchestrated, choreographed, directed, and that realization broke them. Not loudly, not in public, but quietly, deep inside. And that was the moment they walked away, knowing they might lose everything but finally choosing freedom over fear. Because after staying quiet for decades, that former star finally stepped forward and broke the silence. And what came out wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't a trip down memory lane. It was dark. It was unsettling. It was the kind of truth people whispered about for years but never dared to say out loud. The former star said that what the world saw, the smiles, the interviews, the glamorous events, was nothing but a shiny mask covering something twisted behind the scenes. According to the Star, entering the mogul's world wasn't like joining a record label.
Transportation and travel may ultimately testify, we might hear from them, to further establish that this was a sex trafficking case.
And on the interstate commerce charge, if they were to buy an escort from Miami and fly them to New York, would that be considered interstate commerce?
That would be. So the train, or excuse me, not the train, the plane traveling from Miami to New York is an indication that this was via interstate commerce because it's going from one state to another. Even if they traveled via train or via car, going across state lines would satisfy that factor.
We've seen Cassie's off the stand, but whether it's Don Richard's testimony, David James, who's the former personal assistant, he's talked about Cassie as well. What do you make at this point, seeing how the testimony's going, that the government decided to have Cassie early on in this trial as opposed to building up to her testimony at the end?
You know, I'm always in favor, as a former prosecutor, I'm always in favor of putting my victim on last if I can, because her words will echo to the jury indefinitely. You know, yes, she could have testified early and people will tend to remember what they've heard early on and later in the game. But I think here it's really impactful to build up the puzzle, these other individuals who were involved, and ultimately get us to Miss Ventura, who, you know, will testify as to what specifically happened. And the jury is going to be more likely to remember her testimony, especially compelling testimony, if she is the last and key witness. And there would have been a buildup that the government would have made to her testimony. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't come back guilty because she did testify early on, and now these individuals that are testifying are further establishing what happened. That's just a personal preference and what the government ultimately deemed as the best way to, you know, put their witnesses on. And also, Miss Ventura is pregnant, heavily pregnant. They didn't want to run the risk of her going into labor later on during the trial and not being able to be present to testify. So I think that they did have to get her out of the way early. My preference just would have been to put her on later if I was the prosecutor on the case.
We've seen a couple cross-examinations from Sean Combs' defense team. How would you say they're doing thus far?
I think they're doing a great job. I think that the defense is eliciting facts or alleged facts that the prosecution has kept out so far. And one of the things that we always discuss, you know, in trial practice is you never want the jury to find something out from the other side. If you have bad facts for your case, you want to get them out there and do away with it and show them it's not a big deal. Yes, she may not have disclosed certain information previously, and I can explain later as to why, but you really want to get those bad facts out of the way. And I think that at least some of the testimony that I've seen or heard is that, you know, when these when the prosecution witnesses are testifying under cross-examination, the defense is getting out facts that really kind of hurt the prosecution. I think that with Ms. Richard's testimony, she testified that, you know, she had been working with Mr. Combs, that she observed these allegations of violence and things of that nature. But then later down the line, she goes to work for him and works in a musical group with him and another individual. We didn't hear that under the direct examination. We heard that under cross-examination. And I think that those are the things that the government needs to be mindful of because they do seem to be surprising facts as the defense brings them out during cross-examination. And they don't want to turn the jury off, and they don't want to hide anything from the jury.
And with some of these big celebrity names,
it was like getting pulled into an ecosystem of control, secrecy, and manipulation that slowly swallowed your entire identity. The young star said it started innocent, just guidance, just mentorship, just let me show you the ropes. But slowly, the mentorship turned into monitoring. Opportunities came with conditions. Success came with invisible contract lines no one ever explained. Suddenly, you weren't making decisions anymore, you were following instructions. Instructions about what to wear, where to go, who to talk to, what to say, and if you stepped 1 inch out of line, the consequences were immediate and silent. The star described nights that most teenagers would never experience, not in a good way. Parties that felt less like celebrations and more like staged gatherings where everyone acted like characters instead of real people. Rooms full of forced energy, strange tension hidden behind expensive clothes and fake laughter. Nights where the star felt like just another piece of property on display. The star admitted that at first, they didn't realize what was happening. They thought this was normal.
difficult for the defense to have to get over. The defense, however, they're questioning, they may be pressing her on some questions, but she still appears to be responding to them in a neutral manner. She seems to be giving appropriate responses. I haven't seen anything to indicate that she's been combative with the defense, excuse me. And I don't think there's been any significant back and forth between the defense and Ms. Ventura, which as a prosecutor, I like that because I want her to continue to come off as truthful, honest, neutral, and just tell her story and just tell the truth. So I think she's doing a great job for the prosecution in terms of her demeanor and how she's handling being questioned by the defense.
And it seems like the defense are having her read these text messages, and there's moments that it says that she is, planning a freak off, that she wants to be part of a freak off, and they're trying to show that this relationship was not as, in their opinion, volatile as Cassie's testimony made it seem. If you're a defense attorney, do you want a gotcha moment during some point of the time that Cassie's on the stand? Like, what's the end goal of this testimony in the grand scheme of the trial?
You always want your gotcha moment. And for the defense here, it's that Miss Ventura, you were in love with this man. You did anything to be with this man. This is a man who was larger than life at one point in time and still is larger than life to an extent. He had power. He had money. He gave you whatever he wanted. He could have given you the career, or did to an extent give you the career that you wanted. And you participated in this relationship. And in fact, you testified that you wanted to engage in these freak-offs because you didn't want him to do them with anybody else. Again, showing that this was a relationship decision. This was a mutual decision or a voluntary decision that she made to begin this relationship with him, continue this relationship with him, and ultimately it didn't work out. And what I expect the defense is going to somehow try to introduce in a very subtle way is that when you could no longer be with him, or when you couldn't just have him to yourself, you got upset, you departed from the relationship. Later down the line, or I think it was last year, possibly the year before, she files the lawsuit making the allegations. She didn't have to do that. She didn't have to disclose that. But long after they had departed, she had filed this lawsuit, which gave her a financial lump sum of money that put her in a better position than she would have been had she not filed that lawsuit. So showing that financial motivation for coming forward this amount of time later. I expect the defense is going to try to introduce that, but very subtly.
She is considered the star witness in this case because she was so close to Sean Combs for so many years and so close to a lot of the moments that are at the center of the government's case. Hard to know what the defense was expecting through this point in the trial, but has there been any moment that maybe they weren't expecting and would give them heartburn, knowing that this is the star witness and thus far, and they're trying to see that Sean Combs doesn't spend the rest of his life in prison?
Yeah, and the defense, and both the defense and the prosecution, they have heavily prepared for this case. There isn't much that has been presented that either side didn't know about before they had put Ms. Ventura on the stand to testify, or before they began their cross-examination. Every time a defense attorney gets up to cross-examine a witness, or when I ask a question, I already know the answer to that question. And so the defense is well prepared for that. I think the sticky and unfortunate part for the defense is they have to get around, and they had to address the domestic violence factor. It would have been great for them to be able to say, well, none of that ever happened, because it didn't happen, but it's clear that it did based on the Los Angeles video or the hotel footage that came into evidence, and other things that have come into evidence. Really tough for the defense.
This was the industry. This was the price of success. But the deeper they got, the more they noticed the patterns, the people who entered the mogul's orbit full of life but left drained, confused, sometimes completely broken, people who disappeared from the spotlight overnight, no explanations, no goodbyes. And then came the darkest part, the manipulation masked as protection. The star said the mogul made them believe they needed him, that without his power, without his approval, the star's entire career would collapse. Every opportunity was something the mogul allowed to happen. Every success belonged to him first. And whenever the star tried to take even a tiny amount of control back, things mysteriously went wrong. Meetings got cancelled, projects stalled, people suddenly became distant. The machine shut down and left the star isolated. The star went on to reveal that there were moments, late at night, behind closed doors, when they felt like a prisoner in a mansion, that the pressure became so overwhelming that they started losing who they were. They said there were times when they'd go to sleep feeling like the world. And here's where things get even darker. The artist said they weren't telling the whole story. Not yet. They said there were pieces too disturbing, too heavy, too dangerous to drop all at once. But they hinted that the controlling behavior wasn't the worst part, not by a long shot. The moment the interview went live, the industry started shaking. Former collaborators posted vague messages. Old rumors resurfaced. Footage from past events suddenly looked different. People noticed the discomfort in clips they once ignored. The unease in body language. The forced smiles. The strange tension no one could explain. It all started making sense. Meanwhile, the powerful figure stayed silent. Completely silent. No statements. No responses. Nothing. And that silence is louder than any denial. Because when someone who always controlled the narrative suddenly has nothing to say, it means they're afraid. It means they know the dam has cracked. People inside the industry are whispering that more voices might speak up soon. That this wasn't just one artist suffering under the weight of control. That others lived through similar experiences but never said a word out of fear. And now that one person finally broke the silence, the entire foundation is shaking. This isn't a scandal. This isn't a rumor. This isn't gossip. This is the beginning of an empire collapsing from the inside. And if what the artist hinted at is true, then the darkest parts of this story haven't even been revealed yet.